Well, hi, and welcome to our second chapter in our third module. And after we've spoken in chapter 9 about teams and groups, we're going to look at a very important aspect or a very important reason that team and groups are created, and that is to make decisions. So what we're first going to look at is models of decision making in individuals, and then we're going to focus on actual group decision making. So first we're going to look at how as individuals we make decisions, some of the things that play a role in our decision making processes, and then look at how this can be extrapolated to groups and teams. Well, there are two general approaches to decision making, but before we get into that, what essentially is decision making? It says here it's identifying and choosing solutions that lead to a desired state of affairs. That's essentially what we do when we make decisions, correct? We find solutions to our issues, whether those issues, as you'll see, be problems or opportunities to improve. So decision making is all about identifying ways to address a situation, choosing the solution, and applying it to the issue at hand so that it leads to some betterment, some outcome that we actually desire. And the first approach to decision making is what we call the rational approach, and it proposes that managers act rationally, meaning that they try to make the best decision and optimize their well-being, and they do it in a very logical, delineated, specific manner. And so it says proposes that managers use a logical four-step approach. First stage, as we will see, is so as we look at them all, we see this logical progression. It goes from the stage one where we identify the problem or the opportunity that we want to address, the issue, if you will, and go to stage two, then generating alternative solutions, potential approaches to resolving the issue. Three is where we actually evaluate the alternatives. We try to determine which one is better prioritized. And then four is actual implementation. So there is a methodical, logical, sequential approach to rational decision making. Again, assuming that the manager wants to make the most optimal decision that he or she can. Well, looking more closely at these stages, the first one we said was to identify the problem. And normally when we think about problems, we think about it in terms of a negative connotation. Something is going wrong that we need to correct, that we need to fix. So it could be a state where our employees are not turning up for work on time. We have low level of motivation in the organization. And those are traditional problems that obviously we are not at the desired state that we need to be, and we therefore need to move to a desired state. But problems or issues can also be things that are not necessarily problematic right now. They're not necessarily going wrong, but there are areas for which the organization can improve, or there are distinct what we call opportunities that can lead to even greater outcomes and greater performance. And those, in fact, can also be issues that we would like to find solutions for. So, example, let's say we're doing a particular task without a type of technology, and we're doing it pretty well. But if we were to use a technology, if we were to introduce a certain type of technology, it could actually increase our efficiency. So it would provide us with this new opportunity. So while we're doing it okay now, we could even do it better. And that's what opportunities are. So problems can be, again, these negative problems that we think about, but also opportunity. Once we have identified the problem, of course, we want to generate solutions to the problem. If it's a very routine problem, the solutions are kind of always going to be there. They're going to be quite apparent. But the more complex, the more unique the problem is, the more like are we likely to have to look for novel and creative ways to solve it, and therefore we should be careful not to rush to judgment and just use anything that we've used in the past before just because it's there. But once we have these alternative solutions, then how do we choose the best one? Well, there are certain things that we need to ask ourselves. One is, of course, is the solution ethical? While it may correct the problem, it may not be something that we should do morally. So, for example, while we may have a problematic employee and getting rid of them may be the best way, doing that by by producing false evidence is obviously unethical. And while it leads to a desired end, it's not the best way of going about it. Is it feasible? Of course, importantly, can we actually implement this in such a way that it's going to allow us to be successful and reach our performance goal. We don't want to do something that is going to cost us too much or is going to take too much time. We're going to use resources that we don't have. And will it remove the causes and solve the problem? This is huge. If we actually do this, will we come to the desired end state, or will we just kind of feel like we've done something, but there will be no real benefit from it? And then once we've chosen our alternative, once we've proposed the solution that we think fits best, we have to implement it and do it effectively. And once implemented, then evaluate it to make sure that it is actually doing what it's supposed to, actually bringing about those desired end and those outcomes, I should say, that we require from it. And again, we must remember that in the rational model, the process is all about optimization. And what do we mean by that? It's producing the best possible solution. We're taking our time, we're considering all the information that we can, and then we are rationally determining what will be the best solution, what will be the proposal, what would be the process, the action that will lead to the best possible scenario that will get us to that desired end state. So it's all about rational, logical, sequential decision making to bring about the best possible solution. So in summary of the rational model, it would seem that doing or using this model, we increase the quality of the decisions because we're taking our time, we're going through this step by step, and we're not making rushed or hasty decisions. It makes the reasoning behind a decision transparent. There is a logical step to what we've done here so that we can defend, if you will, our decision in such a manner that people will understand how we came about came to this solution from the beginning, from actually identifying the solution. And if made public, it discourages the decider from acting on suspect considerations. So because of, again, this transparency, you want to ensure that, or when you're making these kinds of decisions, it removes some of that level of subjectivity if somebody were to just be doing this for their own personal advancement, let's say. So all of these are potential benefits to rational model decision. The reality is, while we would like to think of ourselves as rational being, the majority of times there is some level of non-rationality that goes into our decision making. Non-rational models of decision making actually attempt to explain how decisions are actually made. So they contrast their models to the rational model and say rational models might be the utopian perspective on decision making. But in reality, human beings are for the most part non-rational entities. And decision making is often a very uncertain process. There is a lot of ambiguity, complexity that surrounds many decision scenarios. Decision makers do not possess complete information. That's called, in essence, bounded rationality. We don't have all the information and we can't necessarily process all the information. And it's difficult for managers to make optimal decisions. It's difficult because maybe you have some individual characteristics, again, their intelligence level, their personality, time constraints, but it can also be internal issues, the capital, the financial resources available to them, as well as something externally in the environment. The lack of information that might be available. And all of those things actually contribute then to a decision making not necessarily being optimal, not necessarily being the best solution, because there aren't always the necessary resources and the necessary time to make that best decision. So as I said before, this concept of the bounded rationality, the decision makers are bounded or restricted by all of these constraints, whether it be their intellect, whether it be their time, whatever it is, internally as well as externally, individually as well. All of that contributes to us not being able to make this rational decision based upon analysis of all the information, taking everything into consideration and being very, very logical and very, very methodical in our approach to decision making. So rather than making the best decision, the most optimal decision, what Simon and O.B. theorists actually argued was that most times in decision making, people don't optimize, they do what's called satisfice. They're satisficing, which is choosing a solution that meets some minimum qualification. Essentially, it's choosing something that's good enough. So it's not perhaps the best. If you had all of these, all the criteria, all the information available to you, you would probably make the most optimal decision. You might not make this decision, but the fact that you cannot or you do not have the ability to do it, then you make what you term to be the best in terms of what you have available, meaning the good enough decision. So for example, when you're choosing maybe a school or even you're choosing a restaurant to attend, you may not go through the process of the rational decision making. You might try to satisfy rather than optimize and choose what you think is the good enough choice. Another non-rational model that actually goes beyond Simon's model is the garbage can model. And it says here that rather than decision making or contrast to the very sequential, methodical, rational model, decision making is actually very, very sloppy and haphazard. And it says decision results from complex interaction of four streams of events: problems, which are the issues, the opportunities that we looked at before; solutions, participants, and choice opportunities. And they argue in this model that those four streams are essentially independent from each other and don't necessarily occur in a very sequential manner. So it's not a case where we first find a problem and then we locate a solution. They argue that there are solutions that are already available in the organization that are essentially looking for problems. So people have already decided, hey, this is something that I want to see implemented, and they kind of go out looking for a problem to actually implement the solution to. Participants, people that are engaged, are not necessarily chosen because they're the most talented or because they can bring the best performance to the situation, but they might be chosen because they aren't doing anything at the time, and so they kind of go in and out the process, and opportunities kind of occur for decisions to be made. And so it's not a case where we're just necessarily making decisions when problems arise. We might find opportunities to make decisions and then try to locate problems to address or at that moment and find solutions, as I said, that may already be there and apparent in the organization. So it's very slow. Well, you can imagine the haphazardness of this type of model, this garbage can model, lends itself to very complex, volatile type environments, type of industries like science-based innovations, where there's a lot of complexity involved and there's a lot of what we call politics. A lot of people have their own personal agendas, wanting to get certain things created, wanting to see certain things produced. And so there is not necessarily this level of rationality where we're considering everything objectively and everything's kind of in line. No, it's more so of having people advocating certain things, having opportunities arising, and then trying to find things to fit into those opportunity problems, in essence, to solve. As I said here, political motives are frequently influenced. People have their own agendas. They have kind of created their own solutions. They think they know the answer, and then they're actually going to find problems. And many decisions are made by oversight. Many decisions are made by it's made by this choice opportunity kind of falling in your lap, a time to make a decision. And so it's not necessarily just problems that have arisen. It's more so opportunities that can present itself. And in essence, ironically enough, with all this haphazardness, important decisions are more likely to be solved. And the reason why important decisions are more likely to be solved is because they will tend to become more salient. They'll tend to be the ones that will be most pronounced in this whole garbage can. They were for lack of a better term, they're probably the ones that are going to stink the most, and they're going to be easily identifiable and then solved. I'm going to take you back a little bit to when we talked about perception. If you remember when we spoke about perception, we talked about some biases that can occur when we perceive, and we talked about stereotyping and those kinds of issues. When people are making decisions, essentially they're also trying to simplify their world, especially if it's a very complex decision. So oftentimes they will use schemas and they will use stereotyping models to help them make the decisions. And unfortunately, sometimes that can lead to distinct biases in the decision-making process. And so a lot of times people use what's called these judgmental heuristics or rules of thumbs or shortcuts. They help just reduce the information. Because again, going back to that bounded rationality, they don't have the time, they don't have the ability necessarily to analyze all information. So they try to kind of create these shortcuts and simplify the process. And here are a few of these biases. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm just going to look at a couple of them. Availability heuristic, meaning that we kind of use information that is most readily available to us when we make decisions. So we go back into our memory bank and we kind of look for the ones that are most recent, the ones that are easily found, and we use that in terms of making a decision. So if I'm evaluating an employee, for example, I might look back at the last few performances, and if they've done good, then I might give them positive evaluations. If they've done poorly, I might actually look at them negatively. So I use this and it can bias my evaluation. Confirmation bias. Basically, I've kind of decided already what things are or how things should be, and then I'm just looking for information to basically confirm that. So I've kind of come about with a solution, and now I'm just basically filtering information so that it can help me to confirm what I already think is the case. And then the escalation bias, or the escalation of commitment, that's essentially sticking to something, a course of action, even when there is information, even when there's evidence to suggest that that is not the right way of doing things. So that's kind of, if you've ever been, as a guys, we kind of tend to do this a lot. But if you've ever been driving down the road and you realize you're driving the wrong way, you keep driving there, you don't ask anybody for direction simply because you don't want to prove yourself right. Or you make the argument, you rationalize it up, put too much investment already in this to kind of let it sink, and you just kind of keep doing it even though it should make sense to you to stop. We next turn to our attention to decision-making styles. And when we look at the different approaches to decision-making, they're based on two dimensions. One is the value orientation. That reflects the extent to which an individual focuses either on task or on people, task or people. So whether or not I'm concerned more about what needs to be done, the technical aspects, or more on the social or people aspects. And the second dimension is tolerance for ambiguity. It's the extent to which a person has a high need for structure or control. Somebody who has a high tolerance for ambiguity can deal with very complex, very ambiguous situations. Someone with a low tolerance needs that type of structure, needs the details in order to make proper decisions. So using these two dimensions, we can actually come up with 4 different decision-making styles. Somebody who has a directive style, as you can see, is very high on task and technical concerns. They're very involved with the details. They're very concerned about the details, but they require a lot of structure. They don't want to have problems where you kind of have to think out of the box, where you have to, where there's too much information that's being left out, where there is a myriad of potential solutions. They want something that is a bit clear cut, that you give me all the information and I can make a very logical decision. Analytical, they are concerned about the facts. They look at the details. They look more specifically at that aspect, but they can tolerate more ambiguity. In fact, these kinds of people may be criticized for over-analyzing situations because they want to explore all the potential alternatives to solutions. Conceptual person is very high on ambiguity, all right? They are okay with lack of detail, lack of structure, but they want, or they're more concerned, I should say, with the social aspect. They do consider some of the technical, some of the facts, the objective facts, but they really are concerned as well about how does this affect people. And then the behavioral person, very high on people and social concerns, really concerned about people when making decisions, but needs that control, needs that structure. This type of person, this behavioral type of decision maker, does not necessarily like to get into conflict and probably will make decisions that aren't in the best interest because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. While we talking about rationality and non-rationality, something that comes into decision making that we must consider is intuition. What is intuition? It says it's judgments, insights, or decisions that come to mind on their own without any explicit awareness of the evoking cues, and of course without explicit evaluation of the validity of the cues. It's kind of making decisions on the hunch. Now that sounds kind of problematic and a little bit naive, especially in the world of business where we think decision makers always consider all the facts and make these rational decisions. And the truth is that while decision makers often try to do it, often try to use information as best they can, they will also at times go with what they call their hunch, go with what they're feeling. And those feelings aren't necessarily just based upon their own whimsical approaches to life. It is actually many times based upon explicit and tacit knowledge, things that they have gained in their past and experiences that they've had. And that causes them to feel a certain way or to act a certain way to a situation. So sometimes for athletes, you say, well, why did you play that shot? Did you like consciously go out there? It's like, no, it kind of just came to me. I felt like this was the right thing to do. And that's what we mean by intuition. Intuition is not an expressive, logical thought about it, clearly validated it before. No, I did something that I felt was necessary at that time based upon how I felt and automatically how I. So with intuition, we can have the holistic hunch, which is based on some integration of information, kind of like just looking at the situation. I get this kind of feeling that about what I need to do, and it's really based upon all this kind of information that's in my memory, that's stored and it's integrated, and I act. And I could also have these automated responses, which is based on a familiar situation, partially subconscious application of previously learned information. So it's kind of like when you're driving and something like gets in your way, you swerve or you move a certain way. And the reason is because based upon your experience in driving, you don't have to automatically tell yourself, okay, now I need to swerve. It's kind of automatic because of something within you, something that's stored, something that you have that you have learned and that you can apply to the situation. And the reality is this: while intuition might get a bad name or a bad reputation in the world of rational decision making, where we believe that our executives should always consider all the possible information, the truth is, with the pressures of time, the complexity of decisions, and all the other factors that play and influence decision making in today's society, intuition does have an absolute role. All that experience, whether it be explicit, whether it's tacit, all that learned, that memory muscle memory, if you will, does have a part to play and can help decision makers evaluate solutions and implement solutions in times, in instances where it's difficult to do that from a purely rational perspective. So there is a role for it. We next turn our attention to creativity, and of course creativity is a huge hot topic in organizational behavior, in business, in management. Its importance lies on its relationship to innovation, that we argue is a major factor in determining the success of organizations in the 21st century. What is creativity? Well, it's defined here as the process of using intelligence, imagination, and skill to develop a new or novel product, object, process, or thought. So it's essentially using your mind, using your cognitive processes to develop something new, whether that be a product, an object, or even a new thought. But while we don't really fully understand how creativity occurs, we can argue that there are some stages to creativity. And the first stage is the preparation, and that really is getting yourself in a position cognitively to be able to be creative. You can do that by becoming more knowledgeable, by reading, by stimulating your mind, even stimulating yourself physiologically, putting yourself in a position to have the resources necessary to integrate in order to be creative. Secondly, it's all about concentrating on a problem, okay? Once you are in the creative process, there will be some situation, some opportunity that you would have to apply creativity to. And you want to concentrate on that and see how best you can use the skills, the resources that you have at your disposal, the information you have at disposal to deal with that. Ironically, too much concentration can actually kill your creativity. So if you're thinking really hard about being creative, you're probably not going to be creative. once you start concentrating, you may go into this incubation phase where you are working on your everyday life. You're kind of doing stuff, and but in the back of your mind, you're mulling over this thing. How am I going to fix it? How am I going to change it? What could I have done differently? I tried this, it didn't work. Maybe I'll try this. That's the incubation phase. And the illumination phase is the aha moment when it clicks for you, when you say, oh, okay, now I get that. Now I truly understand how I can create that, how this can actually be done. And then in that last stage of verification is when you bring it to life and when you actually see the benefits of whether or not it works.